I'm Priscilla, this is Emma, and this is Dannii, and we make up the team from the Northwest Early Start Therapeutic Support Service, or NESTS for short. NESTS is an early intervention program run by Anglicare. It's been running now for approximately 2.5 years, so it's a fairly new program, and it's been evolving the whole time that we've been doing this program as new research has come in, and we've explored all the avenues for therapeutic approaches. We've just taken the bits that have meaning to us and are empirically based, and we're just going with what works for us. So we're an early therapeutic intervention service specifically from 0 to 5-year-olds. Our referrals come from the Gateway Service and involve families that are on the verge of child protection intervention. So we're that one last stop of children being removed. We're going in and we're helping the families to strengthen their relationship and their attachment between the main caregiver and the child. We work with both parent and the child, so we can work with unborn babies, we can work with infants, we can work with toddlers, and we can work with preschoolers. So we're an outreach service, so we go out into the homes of these families, and if sometimes those homes aren't the safest environments for us to work in, we utilise other options such as child and family centres, and we have a very collaborative relationship with them. We also recognise that our parents usually themselves have experienced significant trauma or are still experiencing significant trauma, so our work aims to address that trauma of the parent, and usually those parents have attachment issues themselves, so we go in there as a therapist, we create an attachment relationship between the parent and us, so that they can model that behaviour and that relationship to their child. We also have the capacity to work with our families long term, so instead of going in and doing a 12-week or a 16-week intervention, we can work with our families from the time we go in to the time that child turns 6 years old. So for some of us, Emma has been working with some families since she first started and is still working with those families. For myself, I'm working with a family who I've been working with for 18 months, and there's still a significant amount of work to do with the family, so there's still more time that we can dedicate to that family. Okay. Sorry? Yeah. Oh, Emma just wanted to let everyone know that this is our first presentation. We weren't expecting this many people to arrive. We actually anticipated that there'd be something like 3 to 15 people coming to our workshop. So we actually had some activities to do at the end, which we can't do now because there's just too many people here. So yeah, if we kind of bungle along, that's because we're freaking out.
Presentation virgins.
Yeah, and really hot. Okay, I'm just going to pass it out. So anyway, moving right along, if anybody has any questions throughout the presentation, I don't know how this is going to work because we're very time limited, but if somebody wants to ask a question, just put your hand up. We'll try our best to answer it, but it might be better to leave it, write it down and then at the end see if we can address those questions. We also want to acknowledge that there's just so much information in terms of what we do and how we do it that we can't, we were like, oh, should we put this in, should we put that in? So we've just done a very brief overview of what we actually do. And so there we might be able to answer more questions later on at the end if you have specific questions. Okay, so with our research that we've done, so our research has taken 2.5 years. We're still researching now, we're continually researching, and from that research, well, I suppose our program specifically at the beginning was based on attachment theory. So, of course, we need to acknowledge that the work of John Bowlby, who is, I suppose, the forefather of attachment theory. He was a child psychiatrist, and his work came about during the 1950s, and that was based on his own personal experiences of growing up and his own traumatic childhood experiences based on the lack of attachment that he had with his own parents, because his parents came from upper middle class background in England, who believed that if you that you can't give your child too much attention because you spoil them, so therefore you only spend a limited amount of time with them so that they can grow up to be resilient adults, which was the belief back in those days. But he was quite traumatised by it, so he decided that he was going to do some work around it and go, well, actually that's all wrong, this is what's going on. So he devoted extensive research to the concept of attachment, describing it as lasting psychological connectedness between human beings. Bowlby shared the psychoanalytic view that early experiences in childhood have an important influence on development and behaviour later in life. Our early attachment styles are established in childhood through the infant-caregiver relationship. So from his work, Mary Ainsworth came along and decided to do some empirical research based on Bowlby's theories. Does anybody here know about the strange situation? Yeah, some people. So for those people who don't know, the strange situation was a scientific study conducted by Mary Ainsworth, who had a child and a mother in a room. Now, when the child and the mother were in the room, a stranger came in, the mother left the room and went out. The mother was out for a period of time, and then the mother came in. And the things that Mary tried to observe was how the child reacted when the mother left the room and how the child reacted when the mother came back into the room. So from that, she discerned attachment styles of insecure attachment, of avoidant or ambivalent, and disorganised attachment. But Dannii will go into that further on in the presentation. So from that, so there were empirical studies done. Later on down the years, we got introduced to the work of Dr. Bruce Parry, who was child psychiatrist and also a neurobiologist. His work is very prominent in what we do and the reason why we do what we do. Did anybody here get to see Dr. Bruce Parry when he came down? Yep, so a lot of you are quite familiar with. Yeah, okay. So Dannii will also go into a little bit more of that, the neurosequential development of the child's brain. And also we're influenced by the work of Dr. Edtronic. He also came down quite recently. Did anybody see him? No? Okay. Has anybody seen the still face paradigm? Many people? Yep, okay. So Edtronic did a lot of work around mothers with depression and how that impacts on the child-parent development and then child-parent relationship, and then how that impacts on the development of the child. And yeah, so what we'll do is I'll just play you a quick thing of the still face experiment.
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 34 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. In the still face experiment, what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby, who's about a year of age. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she's used to the mother looking where she points. in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions, they turn away, they feel the stress of it, they lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
I'm here. And what are you doing? Oh, yes. Oh, good girl.
It's a little like the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is that normal stuff that goes on, that we all do with our kids. The bad is when something bad happens, but the infant can overcome it. After all, when you stop the still face, the mother and the baby start to play again. The ugly is when you don't give the child any chance to get back to the good. There's no reparation, and they're stuck in that really ugly situation. So, babies...
Cool. Okay, so that just gives you a bit of an insight into the work that Dr. Parry, Dr. Edtronic has done, and you can see that there are a lot of reciprocal to and fro from the parent to the child, and you can see what the amount of distress that occurs when the mother doesn't reciprocate the child's interactions. That over a long period of time, and it can create developmental trauma, and over a long period of time, the child soon learns to believe that I'm not even going to reach out to my mother anymore because she's not going to respond to me, so what's the point? Or also, you know, I'm not good enough because my mother doesn't want to interact with me, so I'm not lovable, I'm not worthy. So what is attachment? Attachment refers to the special bond that forms in maternal-infant or primary caregiver-infant relationships. That attachment bond has several key elements. An attachment bond is an enduring emotional relationship with a specific person. The relationship brings safety, comfort, soothing and pleasure, and loss or threat of loss of that person invokes intense distress. So why is attachment so important? A solid, healthy attachment with a primary caregiver is associated with a high probability of healthy relationships with others and positive life outcomes. So those children that have a healthy attachment with their primary caregiver will later on in life have better outcomes and better healthy relationships with peers, with other people around them. They will do well in education, they will do well in jobs, they're going to be more successful than somebody who has an insecure attachment with a primary caregiver. Because statistically they're associated with a host of emotional, social, cognitive and behavioural problems later on in life. So those with poor attachments early on in life are more likely to have mental health issues, engage in risky behaviours, develop drug and alcohol issues, become involved in violent relationships. So you can see the negative outcomes there associated with insecure attachments. So what are bonding experiences? Holding, rocking, singing, feeding, gazing, kissing and other nurturing behaviours involved in caring for infants and young children are bonding experiences. Factors crucial to bonding include time together. In childhood, quantity does matter. Face-to-face interactions, eye contact, physical proximity, touch and other primary sensory experience such as smell, sound and taste. Okay. So barriers to bonding. The primary caregiver may have been experiencing emotional physical violence. When a parent is experiencing emotional and physical violence, they're operating at a lower brain function, so they're unable to be there in the moment with their child because they're worried about their own safety. The primary caregiver may have experienced mental illness or unresolved trauma. A lot of the parents that we work with have quite severe depression, so it affects their ability to be able to have that reciprocal relationship with their child. The primary caregiver may have been misusing alcohol or drugs. The infant or child may have been separated from the primary caregiver. The child may have been sick with chronic pain or long illnesses. The children may have been a victim of physical or emotional abuse. They may be neglected or traumatised, and the child may have witnessed or is still witnessing family violence. Timing is everything. Bonding experiences lead to healthy attachments when they are provided in the earliest years of life. During the first 3 years of life, the human brain develops to 90% of the adult size and puts in place the majority of systems and structures that will be responsible for all future emotional, behavioural, social and psychological functioning. There are critical periods during which bonding experiences must be present for the brain system responsible for attachment to develop normally. And I'll just swap over to Dannii now.
Okay, thanks, Zilla. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the development of the brain and the biology behind what Priscilla has just been talking about. So when she's saying timing is everything, if these things don't happen, children get what we call developmental trauma, which is a relatively new term with its root in developmental psychology and traumatology. The definition of developmental trauma is that it's inflicted on infants and children unconsciously and most often without malicious intent by adult caregivers who are unaware of children's social and emotional needs. So a lot of our clients that we get are very unaware of their children's social and emotional needs. A lot of parents that we begin to work with maybe have no issues physically providing for their child, feeding them, clothing them, that kind of stuff, but really have no idea about the importance of the kisses and the cuddles and the playtime. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how the brain develops sequentially. This is work by Parry, so I'd just like to acknowledge him and that we don't claim this work as our own. So the brain is underdeveloped at birth. It organises itself from the bottom up, so it goes brainstem, diencephalon, limbic and neocortex. I'll just talk for a little minute about what each of those functions of the brain are. So the brainstem is responsible for your vital functions, heart rate, blood pressure, temperature control. It's also responsible for your fight or flight response. So that's the most primitive part of the brain. The brainstem is developed at birth. Next we move into the diencephalon, which is responsible for sensory function and motor function. So hearing, vision, smell, touch, taste. It's in the diencephalon where memories actually start to be stored when the brain interprets sensory input. There's some research that suggests that the body remembers trauma pre-verbally before the development of the more complex areas of the brain, such as the cortex. The diencephalon responds really well to music, movement, rocking, singing and patterned repetitive movements. So that's babies really enjoy, and it's really great for their brain development, rocking, singing, all those kinds of things in infancy, which are really important. Moving on to the limbic system, which is the emotional centre of our brain. That's where we have our feelings, that's where attachment comes from, development of empathy, shame, and it's quite impulse driven. The most complex part of the brain is the neocortex, which is the thinking part of the brain, which is responsible for higher functioning and concrete and abstract thought and processing. So the majority of the organisation of the brain takes place during childhood in the first 3 years. Brain development, as previously said, is sequential, but it's also use dependent. So like a muscle, you need to repeatedly use it to make those areas of the brain grow. To illustrate this, there was an experiment conducted on baby kittens, and I'm sorry I can't remember who the researcher was, but if you Google it, it'll be there. So the baby kittens, they actually had their eyes sutured shut at birth, and when they undid their eyes, the kittens ended up being totally blind, not because of anything physically wrong with their eyes, but because they'd missed those important critical parts of sensory input to the brain that allowed them to see. So that's just one example of having to have that sensory input to the brain to actually make things work. So as the brain grows, the higher, more complex areas begin to modulate the more primitive functioning areas. So meaning your thinking part of the brain, the cortex, has more control over the brain stem and the feelings system. So as the brain grows, we become less reactive, less reactive, less impulsive, and more thoughtful. So an example of that is a 3-year-old throwing a tantrum, crying, kicking, screaming, working very much from the brain stem and the limbic system with little control over those, often not able to put words to those feelings, and so really acting out in a physical manner. Where an older, more mature child, provided they've had the right development, may feel like kicking and screaming and biting, but have a little bit more control over the neocortex, so they're actually able to think a bit more before acting out. So, where was I up to? With sufficient motor, sensory, emotional, cognitive and social experiences during infancy and childhood, the mature brain will develop. We like to think of it as like the foundations for a house. If you don't build solid foundations, then the house is going to fall apart a bit and not be so sturdy. It's exactly the same with the brain. Okay, so next slide. So the brain, right through pregnancy into the second year of life, the brain experiences a period of critical accelerated growth. The brain requires not only the right nutrients, but optimal interpersonal interactions for maximum maturation. Gee, that's a big sentence. What that means is by just simply catering to a baby's physical needs is not enough for them to grow or for the brain to actually physically grow. This is where failure to thrive comes in. Some children, we've read studies in orphanages, have actually died due to lack of that human contact. They've been fed and clothed, but they've just not had the human contact, and physiologically they just fail to grow. This is a really good example of that. So this brain is the brain of a normal 3-year-old child. That's the size of the brain, and these photos are not being doctored, these were the actual sizes. This brain here illustrates the brain of a 3-year-old child who's experienced total global neglect during early childhood. The brain is significantly smaller than average and has abnormal development of the cortical and midbrain structures. So that's where you can see the larger black bits here in the brain as compared to here are bits that just have not grown and developed. Like I said, the brain being use dependent is the more you use certain areas of the brain, the more they grow. It's the same with like children who experience trauma and the fight or flight response. The longer they're left in like a toxic stress state, the more likely it is for that area of the brain to be a lot stronger than the thinking parts, and so they tend to grow up to be a bit, more on edge and hypervigilant because that's the way that their brain has grown. Okay, so when a baby is born, the brain houses over 100 billion neurons that will chart neural pathways based just on social interactions. By the age of 2, 85% of the baby's neurological growth is completed, and by the age 3, the brain is 90% of adult size. This illustrates why the first 3 years of life are so critical in brain development for children. Failure to provide adequate experiences has long-reaching effects into adulthood. So this is just another example of brain versus body growth. So we can see here this is the body going up in years. You can see there's a huge spike just in the first 3 years of life in brain growth, and then it stays pretty much stable with a small spike here at adolescence, a bit of a spike here during the mid-20s, and then it remains fairly stable until 40 when the brain goes through a period of reorganisation, which some researchers put down to the midlife crisis. Okay, so how do we help a baby's brain to develop properly? Positive responses from caregivers communicate to a baby feelings of pleasure and safety. This releases a feel-good hormone called oxytocin, which calms the distress response. The exchange of oxytocin is a reciprocal thing between mother and child. It's released during breastfeeding, during smiling, and mum gets the feel-good, baby gets the feel-good, which is kind of illustrated in the picture. Mum's happy, baby's happy. Oxytocin is awesome. It's the antidote to the fight or flight response, and it also helps to combat postnatal depression. So when bubs responded to properly, the baby learns that crying provokes a positive response from mum or caregiver that meets their needs. This leads through to having a secure attachment. So securely attached children are self-confident, trusting, hopeful and comfortable in the face of conflict. Pretty much the same as an adult, empathetic, optimistic, hopeful. 70% of children have secure attachments. Behaviours you might see in children who are securely attached would be crying when separated from the parent, seeking proximity, using the parent as a secure base, and joyfully greeting the parent after separation. So here we have the other end of the scale. So negative responses from the primary caregiver increase physiological and psychological distress to the baby. The baby will feel fear and confusion when their needs are not met, and it increases the production of stress hormones, in particular cortisol. If the consistent response to the baby is either not responding at all or responding in anger, some babies will cease crying. Some will actually, even from a young age, learn to smile despite pain or discomfort because they know that that's going to get a better reaction from the parent. In extreme cases, babies will become disassociative. Their only defence mechanism in fight, flight or freeze is to freeze because they can't run away and they can't fight. So we become really concerned when we hear parents say, "Oh, my baby's so good, they never cry, doesn't matter what happens, they're just so quiet." Sets off real alarm bells for us. So these kind of relationships create negative internal working models, which I'll talk about in a minute, and the baby begins to think that the world's bad and people can't be trusted. So there's 3 types of insecure attachment: avoidant, where the parent's unavailable, self-absorbed or rejects the child. So the child withdraws into their inner world, they avoid close emotional contacts, and as an adult they'll be physically and emotionally distant in relationships, critical, rigid and intolerant. In an ambivalent attachment, the parents are inconsistent or intrusive, and we see that probably a lot with mums that maybe have postnatal depression. Some days they're able to cope really well and respond to baby, and then some days they might just have that flat affect that they're just not having a great day. That's not to say that all people with postnatal depression, their kids will have attachment disorders. Just throw that out there. So the child becomes anxious or fearful, never knowing what to expect. Am I going to get a positive response? Am I going to get a negative response? As an adult, they'll end up being insecure, controlling, blaming, erratic and unpredictable. Disorganised is probably the most concerning type of insecure attachment. It's where the parent ignores or doesn't see the child's needs, or their behaviour is very frightening. The child will become frightened, enter trance-like states, so disassociate when distressed, or show odd combinations of behaviour. As an adult, they'll be untrusting, insensitive, explosive or abusive, and it's generally right on the end of the insecure attachment scale that we would see people who are diagnosed as psychopaths and people that show complete lack of empathy, children diagnosed with reactive attachment disorder. Just wanting to say that attachment is on a continuum, so goes from very securely attached right through to very disorganised attachment and everything in between. So it really does depend. There's a whole lot of different ways they can be. So on to internal working models. The internal working model is a template from which a child and into adulthood uses to navigate and filter all experiences and interactions. Someone with a secure attachment generally thinks, "I'm good, lovable, the world's safe and life's worth living." Someone with a disrupted attachment will think, "I'm bad, I'm wanted, I'm alone, life is not safe and it's not worth living." Securely attached people tend to remain optimistic despite how much adversity they may have had in their lives, and are definitely a lot more resilient. Insecurely attached people often remain negative despite how many good things happen to them in life. All right, cool. I just want to show you a little film clip now, and then I'll ask a few questions after we've seen it. don't let that go on for too long. Oops. Come up here and ask some questions.
Yeah, what do people think that might have been about? How did you feel in the first part of it?
Would have been a lovely stroll, cut some music, made it a little bit hippie.
The first part.
So we tried really hard not to get creepy music for the first part. That was supposed to be really relaxing.
It took us a long time to find that.
Yeah, non-creepy music. So basically, that's kind of illustrating what people's internal working models or what it could possibly like to have a secure or insecure attachment. In the first bit, obviously, it's all nice and there's wonder and you're just going for this lovely walk and you're expecting the best. The second one, I think, really illustrates is how some people can be very hyper-vigilant and you're walking along and it's like you've got the suspense music going so you don't know what's going to jump out in front of you and what's around the corner. We thought that was a nice way to visually illustrate that. All right, thanks guys. I'm going to pass over to Em now to talk a bit about, back to Sil, sorry.
Yeah. What happened to them?
Oh, you just click on the white bit.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So symptom patterns of children with attachment difficulties. So if you're working with children and you're wanting to, you know, go, oh, these kids have an attachment issue, how do I know? These are some things to look out for. So children display a pervasive desire to control the events and people in their lives. I'm working with a child, when I first started working with them, they're 9 months old, and they were very controlling of everything around them. And, you know, you couldn't even, like, hold their hands because they were like, you know, no, that's my hand, I'm going to control it where I want to. They have difficulty with intersubjective experience and reciprocal communication and influence. They habitual hypervigilance, that's particularly dominant with children who are living in family violence situations. Emotional volatility involving intense anger, fear, despair and shame. Emotional numbness, pervasive sense of shame involving a sense of being unlovable, worthless and bad. Difficulty experiencing empathy for others. Often assumes that others are directing negative thoughts, feelings and motives towards them. Possible related difficulties involving speech and language, sensory and motor skills, and self-care development. So some children will have profound and obvious problems, and some will have very subtle problems that you may not even realise are related to early life neglect. These are developmental delays. The bond between the mother and the child provides the major vehicle for learning, language, social behaviour and a host of other key behaviours. Lack of enriched and consistent experiences in early childhood can result in delays in motor, language, social and cognitive development. Odd eating behaviours. Children with severe neglect will often hoard food or gorge on food. Other indicators include failure to thrive, throwing up food, swallowing problems, and later in life, odd eating behaviours that are often misdiagnosed as anorexia nervosa. Soothing behaviours. Children will use primitive, immature and bizarre soothing behaviours. They may bite themselves, head bang, rock, chant, scratch or cut themselves. These symptoms will increase during times of distress. This comes back to that early first couple of months of life where if a child was distressed, a mother would pick up the child and rock the child or comfort the child. The child's learnt that the mother can't do that, so they've developed maladaptive ways of soothing themselves. Emotional functioning, so a range of emotional problems is common in these children, including depressive and anxiety symptoms. Some children develop indiscriminate attachments with complete strangers. These children are often loving and will hug virtual strangers. These affectionate behaviours are actually safety-seeking behaviours. I've worked with multiple families when I've come into the home to do initial assessments, and within the first minute of me being in the home, or the first 5 minutes of sitting on the floor, the child will be in my lap playing with my hair and hugging me and wanting to kiss me. So that's a big, you know, big warning signs there. Inappropriate modelling. Children model adult behaviour even if it's abusive. These children learn that abusive behaviours is the right way to interact with others. This then causes problems with their social interactions and with adults and those of their peers. Aggression. One of the major problems with these children is aggression and cruelty. This is due to a lack of empathy and poor impulse control. These children are often compelled to lash out and hurt others such as animals, smaller children and peers. Again, that's on the attachment continuum, so obviously children with a disorganised attachment are going to be be less empathetic and more violent towards animals and smaller children, peers and siblings. Working with families. Now I'll hand you over to Emma.
I think it was a great strategic move on my part to go last because we're running out of time, so I won't have to talk for very long. Yeah, look, and unfortunately we've only got 5 minutes left, so I will have to maybe not go into as much depth as I was hoping. Mac, no, what do you do? Oh, yes. Okay, so in NEST, I mean, you've just heard a lot of the theories and scientific evidence that underpins our practice, but how do we use that and work with families? So NESTs have a pretty intensive assessment phase. We use a variety of assessments to look at emotional care, attachment, cognitive, intellectual development, social development, health, wellbeing, and even sensory integration. We use some off-the-shelf ones, some that we've developed ourselves, and we often use assessments done by OTs, for example, when we might pick up that there's a sensory integration issue and we refer to some OTs. We do a MIMS assessment, which is an assessment that through TheraPlay. I'll talk about that in a minute. With the parents, we do a lot of attachment and trauma psychoeducation. We explore the child's triggers and which is really important, explore the parent's own attachment history. Often a parent who has an insecure attachment generally has a child with an insecure attachment. When we're working with the parents, we work holistically, but we sort of put it under 4 sort of headings. We look at nurture, so teach them the importance of physical nurture, love, affection and touch. It's crucial. Structure, so we look at routines and repetition and rituals. We help parents manage stimulation, so help them identify when their child is overstimulated and strategies to help them calm them down. We teach them about time in as opposed to time out, so that's with the parent actually taking the child out of the situation and helping them regulate themselves, so the child picks up those self-regulation skills. We teach them about natural consequences as opposed to punishment and talk to them about that importance of supervision. We look at empathy, so we use Tuning Into Kids, which is a program, and we use components of that, so teaching parents about emotional intelligence and playfulness, the importance of parents to play with their children, teach them about fun and laughter and silliness, turn-taking interactions, regulatory activities for the brainstem, which I'll quickly talk about a bit later. Okay, so some of the interventions quickly that we do use. Neurosequential model of therapeutics, which is Bruce Perry's model. It's not really an intervention, it's more of an approach it's an approach that integrates the core principles of neurodevelopment and traumatology and informs the work with the children and families. We were lucky enough to be trained in a 10-week course with Bruce Perry online. So we can do up assessments using, do the case history, send that to a qualified assessor in NMT, and then they do what they call brain mapping, and comes back to us with the particular areas of the brain that haven't formed properly in terms of developmental trauma. So we can then put in our own interventions and therapeutic work and activities to stimulate that part of the brain. So, for example, if it was developmental trauma that occurred from baby birth to 3 months, we might look at brainstem activities such as rocking in a blanket. So if that child's, for example, 3 now, we might get them to rock in a blanket, we might get the parent to wrap them up in a blanket, sit them on their knee, rock them, look into their eyes, so with that eye contact, and maybe sing them a lullaby, things like that. So that's stimulating that part of the brain, so it's the stuff that they missed at age 0 to 3 months. We use video feedback with the parents. That's a great technique for parental reflection. We're tuning into kids. Weight Watch Wonder, animal therapy. Anglicare have a dog, a therapy dog called Dudley. So we have access to Dudley. Drum beat therapy, we use group work and even a camp that we did recently. Never again. No. And next week we're actually going to Hobart, and the ACF are putting on the program movement therapy, so we're going to be learning about that. We do mindfulness and relaxation therapy, trust-based relational intervention, which is a therapy we've just started to research, and crush and bump course. That's like using gym equipment, so it's aimed at sensory regulation. So we're trying to create a sensory and attachment-rich environment in that case. Okay, I'll briefly mention, sorry, it's time finished, but briefly mention that I was lucky enough last year to win Anglicare's Durham Fellowship, which every year they sponsor a worker to travel overseas to gain knowledge in something that you can't readily access in Australia. Fantastically enough, I won that, and I travelled to the USA, Canada and the UK to undertake training in dyadic developmental psychotherapy with Dan Hughes and in TheraPlay. So DDP and TheraPlay are sort of the main two therapeutic interventions that we use in nests. They have the most evidence-based, the most successful outcome with children with attachment disruptions and developmental trauma. DDP, attachment-focused family therapy, uses attunement and subjectivity, builds neural pathways, and Dan Hughes, his sort of acronym is PACE, which is in any interaction with a child or a parent, it's playful, accepting, curious and empathetic. And quickly, TheraPlay. So that's an attachment-based play treatment method for child and caregivers. The relationship is assessed, and that's with the MIMS assessment that I was talking about earlier. So I can assess those relationships, and they're treated according to 4 inadequacies in 4 areas, and they are structure, nurture, engagement and challenge. And they're the 4 dimensions that are found in a functional mother-infant relationship. So then a program of interactive play activities is developed. The therapist models and then coaches the caregivers into new ways of interacting with the child. So by providing the reparative experiences, and so the activities that we do with the children, we repeat every week that we see them. By doing that, we are reorganising the child's internal working model and addressing the disruption of the sequential development of the brain. So I was going to go through the 4 actual, there's different examples up there of some of the activities that we use, linking into each dimension. But I really don't have time to do that, especially if there's any questions. But this information can be made to give out to anyone who wants it. Yeah, okay, so are there any questions at all?
Could you tell me what the
MIMS assessment? Yeah, is the Marshak interaction method, and it's not standardised or anything. It's just a tool for assessing the relationship between a child and its main caregiver. We would video record it and then sit with the parent and and work through it. Yeah. Yes.
Are the interventions and the therapeutic models that we use useful for children beyond the age of 6?
Absolutely, yeah, and it's really unfortunate that we don't have that, because there's a massive gap for children that are aged 6 to 10 that we've found. There's not a lot of services out there that work with children, and that's really when they start being identified, like in the school system, when their behaviour is out of control. But yeah, so absolutely, TheraPlay especially. Actually, you can use TheraPlay with adolescents even, so you can, yeah. Sorry? Oh, yeah, what about it? Oh, so, yep.
Are you psychologists or social workers?
Social workers, yeah.
And is there a like service in Launceston?
No, not like Nest, but there is New Pin, who I believe, do similar. Actually, I'm not really sure. Oh. Okay. Anything else? Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So when we work with the parent, actually, that's probably the key to start with, is that we get that, that we turn on the attachment system in the parent so that they can model that to the child. But by doing that, that's where we use DDP and TheraPlay activities. So I've actually got clients that I'll massage their hands, for example, to do that nurturing stuff. And these are, at the very, like 2.5 years I've been working with this particular client, and to start with, yeah, I would never dream of touching her. She didn't even touch her children, but now I can sit there and give her hand a massage, and she can now do that to her children, things like that, yeah.
So in terms of like maintaining relationships, probably work with adults with attachment issues, like maintaining relationship over time.
Yes.
And either become therapeutic engagement or engagement with their children can be really challenging. How do you deal with some of the challenges of actually maintaining that engagement with people over that period of time?
Yeah, it has been difficult with particular clients, but I suppose the unique thing about our service is that we can just hang in there. Sometimes we just send a letter every week if they don't even want to see us, until eventually, you know, we might have face-to-face contact. And like I said, it can take 2.5 years to get to a point where, oh my God, you know, the parent has an aha moment, and yeah, we've got that relationship now. But that's what's great about Nest, is that we can hang in there for that long. It's rare in these days in services, yeah. Okay, thank you.